Where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay. When you move, I'll move. I will follow. All your ways are good. All your ways are sure. I will trust in you alone. Higher than my sight. High above my life. I will trust in you alone. Where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay. When you move, I'll move. I will follow you. Who you love, I'll love. How you serve, I'll serve. If this life I lose, I will follow you. I will follow you. Light unto the world, light unto my life. I will live for you alone. You're the one I seek, knowing I will find all I need in you alone. Where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay. When you move, I'll move. I will follow you. Who you love, I'll love. How you serve, I'll serve. If this life I lose, I will follow you. I will follow you.
Hi, I'm Jen Mayer, and I'm on staff at St. Pius. This week we began a new preaching series called United We Stand. In it, Father Mike talked about how we live in a culture of outrage and how we, as Christians, need to act differently using a method Jesus outlined. Today I want to dive deeper into that method Jesus outlined, particularly the very first step. Just to review, in it, Jesus talked about what we should do if our brother sins against us. He said the first step was to talk to this person directly. If we were unable to persuade them, we should bring one or two others to help establish the facts. If that didn't persuade them, we needed to tell the church, and if that failed to persuade them, then and only then were we to treat them like an outsider, in the language of the Gospels, as a tax collector or Gentile. And the reason I want to go back and look at that very first step is for so many of us, that's really difficult. There's two issues with it. The first is, what does it mean for someone to have sinned against us? And then how do we gather the courage and the fortitude to actually have these conversations? So let's start at the beginning. What does it mean for someone to have sinned against us? Well, this is a series about the election, and although it's tempting, it turns out that if somebody holds a differing political opinion from us, that in and of itself is not a sin, no matter how correctly we think we've formed our opinions and how right we are. So if that's not a sin, how do we figure out, well, what is? I think the way to think about this is to think about the impact people's actions have had on us. Is it something that they've done where we have either been harmed as a result or felt pain? If either of those is true, and it's a relationship we care about, it's time to have the conversation. You know, over the years, I've become very grateful that people have taken the time to have these conversations with me. They were never easy in the moment for either of us, but ultimately I've grown a great deal as a result. And I really appreciate the fact that they loved me enough to take me aside and have these conversations and not just kind of let the relationship fade away. Here are a couple things I've learned in those conversations. The first is that in my eagerness to help, I can often be perceived as critical of the way people are already doing things. The second is that turns out nobody really likes unsolicited advice and they don't really appreciate it, and it probably would be better not to offer it. And the third is that when I get really focused on completing a task, I often don't realize or hear what I'm saying or the tone of voice with which I'm saying it, and I unintentionally hurt people. Now, not one of those things is rocket science, and I'm guessing that most of you probably wouldn't have needed to be taken aside and told those things, but I did. And so I'm really grateful to the people who took the time to do it. I know that those are hard conversations to have, and I've tried to make them easier on the people around me by inviting feedback, particularly prompt feedback. It's so much easier for someone to say, you know how you think you're being helpful, but you're not? You're not always, yeah, this is one of those times. Or, hey, did I ask for advice right there, or did you just think I needed it? So with those situations, I always want to remember to thank people because I know how hard it can be to raise the issues. It's so much easier to just ignore stuff. But there are times when we can't, and times when we shouldn't, because there are people that are hurting us that we love, and we don't want them to be stuck in that pattern of behavior. So here are a couple of things I've learned over the years about how to help the process along. The first is, it's really helpful for me to get out of the emotional turmoil of the moment. So I need to wait till I'm calm enough to talk about it, but not so long that weeks or months have gone by and they can't reasonably be expected to remember what happened. So, there's a sweet spot. For me, it's a couple minutes to a couple days. The second is that this is always, when it's this big a deal, it's always good to take it to prayer. And there's two ways that I find that to be helpful. The first is to pray over the situation and separate out what happened and why I reacted as much to it as I did. And the second is to ask God to give me both an opportunity and words to have the conversation. When you ask God to give you an opportunity, He almost always will find a way. When you get to the point where you're actually having the conversation, a really good first step is to establish what happened. Lots of times I've actually found that things that I got very upset about were misunderstandings, that what I thought had happened and what they experienced as happening weren't the same. And so we didn't really need to even go into the impact that it had on me because we could clear it up right then and there. But sometimes there really is a situation and everybody agrees on what happened. When that happens, that's when it's important to move on to how it impacted you and to say it clearly, and then give them time to think about it and respond. Two other things that I found to be really helpful. One is, I really dislike it when people say things like, you always do this. It is so much more helpful for me when they say, last Tuesday when we were going shopping, you did X. That gives me a way of remembering exactly what happened, to think about whether or not, I was in task mode and what was going on. So again, specific rather than pattern. And then the last would be to try and have these conversations in person or in time of pandemic, at least over the phone, to give people the benefit of hearing the tone of my voice, to hear the pain or the not pain in it, and to understand and be able to ask clarifying questions. Often I've seen people try and do this by email, and it almost always goes badly because it's so easy to overread or underread tone in email. So when I go back to the first question, does Jesus' method work? In my experience, it does, but it's often hard, sometimes painful. What's been your experience? Have you actually gone through the steps of this method? Did they work for you? What tips would you have to share with others?